You know, you may not need your entire toolbox of cooking skills this holiday season, so let's talk about the cooking methods that you will need for your holiday cooking this year. Simplifying holiday cooking with the most used methods is what you'll find out today on the Carefree Cooks Code. I'm Chef Todd Moore, and this is the Carefree Cooks Code, every Tuesday live at noon Eastern. Here's our challenge. How can home cooks cook freely with creativity, confidence, and pride while ignoring recipes and still impressing themselves and others with what they cook? Well, the answer is found in becoming empowered with how cooking works, using dependable and repeatable methods of cooking that work for any ingredient, for any diet, and any desire, just like chefs do. And we'll know we've cracked it when everyone sees cooking as an exciting and rewarding way to improve their relationships, their lifestyles, and their health through better food and cooking. This is the Carefree Cooks Code. Oh, my big hearty welcome to everyone. Welcome back to the Carefree Cooks Code. We are live every Tuesday at noon Eastern time. If it's noon Eastern and you're not with us and you're wondering why, that's because you didn't go to get my alerts. My alert system at webcookingclasses.com/live, and you'll get an alert every time we're going live because we're the Carefree Cooks, right? We create our own recipes. We bring friends and family together. That's the most important one of our creed this time of year, right? We learn every time we cook. We define our own cooking styles, all because we practice the pro methods and wind up loving our cooking. That's really what it's all about. And as a carefree cook, you've got, at least 13 prime cooking methods at your disposal to make a great holiday meal, right? But there's more skills. There's a bunch more procedures and techniques that you're going to need this holiday cooking season. And that's when it starts to get kind of scary and intimidating, when you start to list all the things in your head that you're going to have to do. And of course, everybody has their own personal request. And grandma isn't going to come if you don't make the string bean casserole. And somebody's got to have sweet potatoes. Somebody's got to have white potatoes. No wonder it gets so stressful and intimidating. But look, if we can simplify this whole thing for you, and if we can choose only the cooking methods that you're going to need, then this whole scariness about holiday cooking, it actually becomes quite exciting and a lot of fun. And that's the point I want to try and get you to today. But first, First, I've got a what am I for you today. It's a holiday what am I. It's a holiday tradition in my home every year. Do you know the name of this thing over here, over there, that thing over there, anyway, it's got 13 letters in it. I gave you that hint this time. It's a fancy French name. Those are a bunch of puff pastries that are all glued together. One of my favorite things to do with the holidays. So, in the comments section below, because the camera's backward for me. That's why I have trouble with that. In the comments section below, tell me what that is. Okay, look, we got a lot of cooking ahead of us this year in the coming, 6 weeks or so until it's all over. You think about this. From now, it's only 6 weeks, and I want to be with you every step of the way. I want to help you create the best holiday meal this year. I want you to feel like a guest at the table instead of being stressed out like the caterer. And I've been on both ends of that. And this starts with simplifying. If you want to reduce your stress, you simplify what you need to know. And, I know you're already a skilled and confident cook, and there's a ton of cooking procedures that you can show off with this holiday. But why? Why make it so complicated? You can show off any other time of the year if you want. So let's get out my ancient book of holiday cooking methods, and let's use only the methods that you actually will need to make a great holiday meal this year, and leave the other methods, the other things in your repertoire, leave them for another time. The more methods you use, the more complicated it gets, the more stress you have, the more likely it is for it to go wrong. So here are the most used cooking methods at the holidays that we're going to review. And you might want to take notes today if you open up a word processor or Is that an old term? Open something you can type on or get something you can write on, because you're going to want to start building your holiday cooking methods list right away. So I'll give you a second to do that. But if you're a lifetime member of Web Cooking Classes, I'm going to go ahead and post this notes page right here in our Carefree Cooks community at the end of our broadcast, so you don't have to worry about it. If you're a member, you can download that later. Go to the Carefree Cooks community. You'll have all the notes. So let's start today. Let's get started chronologically. Okay, the early prep stages of your meal for the holiday. Let's start with these methods that you would use to par cook, right? To blanch food. It's what we talked about last week, right? When we started setting you up with culinary vocabulary. You didn't think there was going to be a test, did you? But now you need to know what blanch and par cook is and the difference between the two of them. And if you didn't see last week's episodes, Cooking Words Matter, the Carefree Cooks Code from last week, you should go back and watch it right after we're done today. And if you didn't see that episode, then I'm going to remind you that blanching is partially cooking something in a hot liquid for future preparation. And it's a fantastic idea in prepping your holiday meal because it saves you a ton of time and worry because you know the items are already cooked and they just need to be reheated. So the first holiday cooking method we're going to examine is steaming. Throughout the rest of the year, you admit it, you don't steam much. Right? You just don't. It's kind of a forgotten cooking method because it's not exciting. You don't get a sizzle. You don't get a great smell. You don't get caramelization of sugars, right? But steaming is a great method for saving yourself time on the day. And steaming is a moist heat, indirect, convective cooking method. More vocabulary words for you. So if you know it's indirect convective and it's moisture, well, then you know it's got to be one of the healthiest ways to cook because you never need to add fats to steaming. And steaming is great, is also great for someone who likes to walk away from their cooking. No, by the way, you don't walk away from your cooking. I saw a discussion this week about how they walk away from the cooking. No, you don't do that. But with steaming, you can leave it alone a little bit because you can't burn anything with steaming, right? All you can do is boil the pot out, and kind of ruin your pot, but you can't burn your food. And the best items for steaming are the proteins that are going to be used in another preparation or your vegetables for the holiday meal. So let me tell you what I'm talking about here. For example, let's say you choose to do my famous chicken Wellingtons appetizers, the mini chicken Wellingtons, puff pastry dough, mushrooms, piece of chicken. They're the ones, the hors d'oeuvres I make at most holidays. They're the ones we used to make by the thousands when I had my catering company. We'd spend a weekend making chicken Wellingtons. But since the puff pastry wrapped chicken, I want it to be really moist and it's going to be cooked again, right? These little puff pastry things are going to be roasted in the oven. I want to give the chicken as much moisture as I can before it goes in the oven. And that's why with the Wellingtons, I might consider par cooking and steaming the chicken instead of grilling it or sauteing it. It's going to get wrapped in puff pastry. Who cares if it's got like grill marks or caramelization of sugars? Who cares what it looks like when it's wrapped in puff pastry? And if you don't care what your food looks like, then steaming is really the way to go. It's not an attractive way. But look, I recommend steaming, blanching, more appropriate for vegetables. I recommend blanching as many of your vegetables before the big day as possible. So if you're making a string bean casserole, don't wait until the day of the meal to start cooking the string beans. They don't cook very well. If you just put raw string beans with cream of mushroom soup, and it's hard to tell when they're done, right? So why don't you control the process a lot more? And if you have them steamed ahead of time, then you can just reheat the cream of mushroom soup, or hopefully you've made your own bechamel sauce and added mushrooms to it. But either way, you're going to cover those beans with the sauce, heat up the sauce, reheat the already blanched beans, put them in the pan, and that saves you a tremendous amount of time. If you're making mashed potatoes, you could definitely steam cut up and cubed potatoes, chill them in water so air doesn't get to them. And then you can reheat them later to mash them or stuff them back in potato skins. It saves you time again. And if you were with me last, just 3 days ago, if you were with me last Saturday, I showed you the simple trick to making those potatoes even whiter and the green beans even greener for a better looking result. And if you didn't make it to that live event, first of all, you must not be part of my alert system because you would have known all this was going on. But that's another video you probably want to go watch before you start making anything that's white or anything that's green this holiday season. Okay, let's go over it. Steaming method goes like this. Simmering, not boiling, okay? Not boiling liquid in a pan, and the food item must be suspended above the heat source. That is so important with steaming. If you let the water rise up and touch the food, then you're boiling the food. And boiling, as you've heard me say, is not a cooking method. So in steaming, there should be no direct contact with the cooking liquid. And the best way to do this is to have an item with a steamer basket. I have an asparagus steamer. It's a very long, tall, cylindrical pot with a steamer basket in it. I like long, tall because the steam rises and it's a really good thing for steaming stuff. If you don't have an asparagus pot or an inset in one of your stock pots for a steamer, then just get a strainer. Or a colander that fits across the top of a saucepan or a stock pot. Something that should be steamed, remember, has to be in a closed environment. And that means that if you create this steaming vessel with your colander or your strainer, you got to have a lid on it. The lid catches the steam. It's a little cooler at the top of the lid, so the steam condenses. It rains back down on your food. It hits the heat source, gets heated up, lives again as steam until it hits that lid again. It's got to be a closed system, and that's where the convection comes in, right? Rising, cooling, falling, heating, rising, cooling, convection, right? This is how you cook your food. Next thing, how do you tell when something steamed is done? Not easy to stick your thermometer into a string bean. It's not something I would recommend you do. It's simple. You need to taste it. You need to bite it, really. But look, there's a safety issue here first. Do not take a green bean out of the steamer and immediately put it in your mouth unless you want to burn the heck out of your mouth. Always rinse the steamed item in cold water first to stop the cooking and then make it safe to bite into, and that's how you can tell if it's done or not. Keep in mind also, if you're going to cook it again, if you're going to cover it with sauce and put it in the oven and let the sauce come to a boil, well, you might want to cook these things a little al dente because they're going to take more heat. All right, the next holiday cooking method that you're going to be using is also a moist convective method, but it's when the item comes in direct contact with the cooking liquid. And this is poaching and simmering. These are also great for blanching items for later cooking, but there's an important difference between poaching and simmering. And remember, boiling is not a cooking method. I can't say that enough. Boiling, people, why, Chef Todd? I have boiled eggs. I have boiled potatoes. You really don't. If you're doing it right, you should not have boiled eggs. You'll crack the shell, probably. Boiling is just too high a temperature for a liquid, and it's way too violent an environment for food. Boiling is at 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius, but think about this. Most items are fully cooked at 165 degrees. Why do you need the extra 50 degrees Fahrenheit or so? It's just unnecessary. It's just unnecessary to have all that extra heat and all that violent heat as well. So that's my soapbox about boiling today. People asking me all the time, they're always saying, what about boiled eggs? No, you simmer things. It's like cooking an omelet in a 500 degree oven. The eggs just don't need 500 degrees, but a true simmer is a great way to cook because you control the movement of the liquid better and it doesn't destroy your product. The difference between boiled potatoes and simmered potatoes is going to be found in the milky white water that you have left over and the bunch of busted up potatoes that you have floating around. Simmering is 185 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 85 degrees Celsius. This is when the liquid you're cooking in has small bubbles around the edge of the pan, not running wild, violent bubbles. You see just a few of them around the edge of the pan. You can see the convection in the pan, a little bit of like a lazy river thing. Things are moving around. The movement of the liquid you can see with the bubbles, but it's very slight. And a poach is just a bit less than this. It's also a moist, convective cooking process, but poaching is done at about 165 degrees Fahrenheit or 74 Celsius, and it has no visible bubbles. It has very slight convection to the liquid. You might see a little piece of food or something slowly float by, but it really should be no movement. Now, people just think moist cooking, you just throw it in there, you cook it, and you take it out. Did you realize there are 3 ways to cook in direct contact for moisture? And why would you pick one over the other? Well, poaching is best for really delicate items, like fruit for your pies. If you're going to poach peaches, poach pears, poach pomegranates, or poach parsnips, for a poached parsnip pomegranate peach pie, then you probably want to poach instead of simmer, and certainly not boil. Thank you, the alliteration brought to you by the letter P today. One of the biggest advantages of these 2 methods is your ability to flavor the liquid in cooking. Simmering or poaching in chicken broth or vegetable broth will always give you a better depth of flavor than water will. And remember, carefree cooks know nothing has less flavor than water. So the method for simmering and poaching is number 1, to bring the liquid to a boil. No, whoa, I know I said no boiling, and now I am here, bring it to the, yes, a boil. You bring the liquid to a boil, not a rolling, violent boil, right? But just until you start to see those large bubbles and the quick motion. And the reason for that is because when you drop in the food item, it's immediately going to drop the temperature, and it's going to bring you down to a simmer, or you lower the heat to a poach. Add your item and control the heat. As it starts to rebuild in the pan, you lower it for the perfect poach. You might raise it for the perfect simmer. You cook with the visual cues that I just described. And these are the best methods for blanching your food. All those P's totally messed up my tongue. What you want to do is they reheat items with this. It's a great method for par cooking, for blanching, and reheat them. The holiday cooking method you're probably going to use most in all of your cooking is roasting. And roasting is a dry, convective cooking method that you accomplish by simply enclosing your food in a metal box that's filled with hot air. The metal box heats the air, and the air cooks your food. That's why it's an indirect cooking method. Because it's an indirect, dry method, you can expect a lot of evaporation of moisture. It's obvious things dry out in the oven. They shrink, they stiffen. But look, protecting that moisture is one of the biggest challenges for the home cook. Nobody wants that stereotypical dried out turkey. Nobody wants over-baked potatoes that are really mealy and flavorless, right? Roasting is for your whole bird. It's for poultry. It's for that large cut of beef or lamb, as well as for your casseroles or browning up those parsnips, peaches, pomegranates, and whatever else I said. Look, the procedure, another P, for roasting is really simple, but it's not easy. Now, come on, Chef Todd, you put something in an oven, you close the door. How easy could that be, right? But there's no stirring to it. You don't have to mess with it. There's no turning, There should be no basting. While I get off on another tangent, don't baste things. Basting is just a useless myth. Once you put the oven to roast, or you put the item in the oven, try not to open the door if you can help it. You let way too much heat out every time you open the door. But look, there's a lot more to roasting than just opening or closing the oven door. The first thing you have to be aware of, as all web cooking classes students are, is that your oven is lying to you. We don't trust our ovens around here. What the oven dial says is not the temperature of the oven at all times. So do not roast things by time and oven temperature. It's the worst way to cook. And it's one of the first things I try and get across to anyone that starts to join me in following these lessons. How long you cook something is never precise enough because of all the variables that go into cooking with an oven that is always lying to you. Also keep in mind that heat bounces around in the oven. It reflects off the top, the bottom, the sides, the pan, the tin foil. So if you want something that's browned on the top, put it on the top rack. It will take more heat from the top of the oven. If you want your casserole that's in a glass pan, because glass retains heat so much better, then you should put it on the bottom rack. You want to heat up the glass pan, right? And where you cook in your oven can make a really big difference. Okay. Next, how do you tell when it's done? Well, roasting always calls for an instant read digital thermometer. There is no more precise way to tell when your item is done. Know your finished final temperatures and quantify doneness with your thermometer. Don't guess and gash, please. It's just too easy to have a thermometer. Okay, running low on time. So lastly, here's my best tip for roasting that almost anybody can do, but nobody does. All right? This is the big tip for roasting that nobody does, but they should. If roasting is drying, then how about adding some liquid to the environment? If you'd like to retain moisture in just about everything you roast, put a pan of water in the bottom of the oven. It makes sense, right? And as the water turns to steam, because you will be roasting at above 212 Fahrenheit or 100 Celsius, it fills that metal box with a moist environment. So now there's no room for your food to dry out. But always another side to it. Keep in mind that moisture inhibits gelatinization of starches, caramelization of sugars. Moisture inhibits caramelization of sugars, so it makes it much harder to brown things. So if you want a brown turkey and you want to add moisture to the oven, you're going to need my bottom-up cooking method first, and then you'll go ahead and add liquid to the oven. Liquid in a pan in the oven. Don't just pour water in your oven. All right. Now, roasting is a lot different than baking because your goals are entirely different. And I hate when people say they baked their beef or they baked their turkey, because we went over this with vocabulary words. The cooking words do matter last week. And in baking, you're still using dry convective heat, just like roasting. But look, your turkey is not going to leaven, right? It's not going to puff up like a biscuit. That's one of the goals in baking that you don't have in roasting. Caramelizing the sugars on the outside of your beef roast calls for much higher temperatures than getting a brown crust on your dinner rolls. And I'll use my bottom-up cooking method for my turkey. I'll start it out at like 500 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a temperature I would never bake anything out, because a baked good at that temperature might brown first before it leavens and before the baked good structure is set. So that's when you get a hard black hockey puck instead of a blueberry muffin. The roast at this temperature is going to be brown and moist on the outside, but the bread is going to be dense and burnt. So a lot more care is taken in baking. Baking calls also for precise placement in the oven because, right, we've all had that pan of cookies that were on the bottom rack of the oven and they're all burned on the bottom, right? So if your oven is filled with cookies, it's totally full of pastries or pies, I won't do it again, and you need the bottom rack and the top rack, but you're afraid on the bottom they're going to burn on the bottom and on the top they're going to burn on the top. I've got my best holiday baking tip for you, and it's simple. It's 2 words. It's double panning. The whole idea would be to pan your items twice. If you use 2 pie tins on your pies, they can go on the bottom rack. If you use 2 sheet pans under your cookies, then you create an air gap that's going to dissipate some of the heat, and it's going to help prevent that bottom rack from burning on the bottom. Double panning is a much better idea than opening the oven multiple times to move something from the top rack to the bottom and the bottom rack to the top. You lose so much heat that way. Double panning is the way to go. And by the way, when we're talking about baking, I need to remind you that most baking mistakes don't happen in the oven. They happen in the mixer. All right? So there are specific mixing methods to arrive at the baking result that you want. Baking, it's not just as simple as putting all the ingredients into the mixer and turning the mixer on. Cookies, cakes, some pies, they call for a creaming method where you cream the butter and the sugar first to add air. But things like biscuits and scones, they call for a biscuit method where cold fat is cut into the flour. Muffins, quick breads, brownies, things like that, they use a muffin method where melted fat is mixed into the other ingredients. So, it gets a little confusing. Each of these methods will give you a different result, even if you use the exact same ingredients with each. And web cooking classes students, we spend more time studying the mixing methods than we do the baking temperatures. They matter so much less. All right. Lastly, the holidays are the perfect time for combination cooking methods like stewing and braising. And these are the original, perhaps, holiday cooking methods. Think about back in Victorian days, back in Ebenezer Scrooge's time, they weren't deep frying turkeys. They weren't like grilling black bean cakes or something. They were simmering stews and large roasts in heavy iron pots over an open fire. And stewing and braising give you the opportunity to turn tougher cuts of meat into something really tender and flavorful. And braising is the way to make that leg of lamb or the top round roast really burst with vibrant flavors of herbs or broths that are used in this low and slow cooking process. So quickly, here's the procedure for the combination cooking methods. First, the item is generally browned to render fats into the pan. And there's a myth that browning meats somehow seals in the juices. This just is not true. That's not why you brown meats in a braising method. Proteins in a combination cooking method are used to render fat first, add flavor, sweeten it through caramelization, and give some visual appeal. Then you've got aromatics that are sauteed in the fond. That gives you way more flavor. And then liquid is added to deglaze the pan and start your braising liquid. Adding acids will tenderize things like tomato, vinegar, wine, citrus. This helps break down connective tissues and it helps tenderize the meat as well. And then it's just a matter of long, low, and slow until it's done. And how do you tell when it's done? Well, you could certainly take out your thermometer for a braised or stewed item with these methods, but the item is safe well before you stop cooking it, because the idea is to cook it for a really long time, right? I mean, there are plenty of cooking methods that a carefree cook is confident in, but you don't need all of them this time of year. Your meal will be so much better, so much easier, so much more fun, and so much less stressful when you focus on the few methods that you do need this holiday season. And I tried to keep this simple. I'd say the cooking method should be simple, so I try to keep this class simple as well, very straightforward and uncomplicated. Hopefully I've accomplished that. I know I used the vocabulary, but I gave you that last week. And if you missed some of these methods, don't forget, I'll be posting this notes page in our Carefree Cooks community when we're finished today. So, all right, let's go to our Carefree Cooks community. Speaking of which, let's see who's got a jump start on their holiday baking in our Carefree Cooks community. First is Sherilyn. Sherilyn has the holiday spirit. She's already trying out some of the best methods for her apple pie, the combination of mealy crust or flaky crust, mealy on the bottom, flaky on the top, flaky on the bottom, mealy on the top. She's going to poach the apples or roast the apples. There's so many things to figure out. Nicely done, Sherilyn. Dennis is practicing his baking and icing as well. He put together a butter brickle cake that sure makes it look like he's ready for the holidays. Oh, next, I love this story. Beth posted these cookies in our Carefree Cooks community. Another alliteration. But this is a great story. She got the recipe off a label that was on a bottle of cane syrup that she bought. So it had just a list of ingredients, like recipes do. They always tell you what, they never tell you how. So she had the list of ingredients, but she didn't have any directions. So Beth wrote me and she said because of the mixing methods class in web cooking classes, she didn't even need the directions, because she looked at that ratio of sugar and butter and also the fact they were cookies. She knew it was the creaming method. So she went through the creaming method. They came out perfectly. Nicely done, Beth. Love that story. Thank you. Nancy posted her first ever baguette loaf based on my 1810 and 2 yeast dough formula. And I'm really glad she did. Thank you so much, Nancy, for posting this, because I encourage all carefree cooks to post their early photos, because it's the beginning of your journey. You'll be able to look back and you won't believe how far you've come in just a few months. So early pictures. Now, Nancy said her bread wasn't holy enough. I don't think that had anything to do with religion. She meant there weren't nice air holes in the bread, and that, of course, comes from the health of your yeast and letting it proof and ferment correctly. But she's going to go back and work that yeast dough method again, and her journey will continue as a carefree baker. Nora is in the holiday spirit already. She's starting to practice with her chocolate truffles rolled in coconut. Ho, ho, ho. We are ready for the holidays. And I get so excited about the holiday season because you and me, we are going to have the best meals together this year, and we've got so much more to come. Don't miss next week's Carefree Cooks Code on Tuesday. What time? Noon Eastern. That's right, because we're going to be talking about the best way to infuse flavor and moisture in your holiday meal. Next week, we'll talk about the differences between marinating and macerating. That's next Tuesday at noon Eastern. Your What Am I this week? Anybody know what this was? A very Frenchy word, 13 letters. This is a pile of puff pastry. I just can't avoid it today. It is a pile of puff pastry profiteroles glued together with caramelized sugar, and it's called a croquembouche. Croquembouche. Extra points for you if you knew how to spell it also. Croquembouche is the What Am I this week. And look, if you know someone who's already freaking out over having to cook a big holiday meal, take their hand, tell them that everything is going to be okay. It's all right. Share this video with them so they too can focus on the only cooking methods that they're going to need to follow this holiday promo. And if you're serious about wanting to create the best holiday meal ever with precision and confidence, without stressing out over the holiday dinner, without feeling like the caterer instead of a family member, you should go ahead and register now for my new 2019 Holiday Cooking Success class. It's going to show you exactly how to plan, cook, bake, coordinate, and use leftovers effectively. All you got to do is go to webcookingclasses.com/success and hold your spot in the next class. So until next Tuesday, where we take the next few steps toward breaking the Carefree Cooks Code, this is Chef Todd Moore reminding you that there's a method to your holiday cooking success. Bye, everyone.